Walker Brewing Company out of the Central Coast of California. Inevitably, I know how heightened all of the attention is towards just San Diego beers, but I guess along those lines, we have such a good, real serious support base as far as all these San Diego breweries down here. I mean, breweries like Stone, Pizza Port, Coronado, some of these other local breweries are carrying these beers on draft at their breweries. So just goes to show the quality that you really should represent when it comes down to presenting these beers. But I guess particularly 3 or 4 steps as far as your the proper way to taste the beer. The first one's going to be obviously holding up to the light. Welcome, come on in. Yeah, holding up to the light and kind of seeing what your eyes are telling you about this beer. And I think this is a part that particularly a lot of people get confused about, I guess. Or not so much confused, but their heads tell them a lot about what they are tasting. But in actuality, your head isn't always accurate, quite honestly. So basically, really, your mind's going to tell you something about the beer just based on the color. So the next beer that I'll introduce, a Guinness, dry stout, it's telling you that it's real heavy, but in actuality, that's almost like a diet beer, Guinness. It's a 4.2, real low, real mellow. It's actually nitrogen-based, so it's not carbonation, so you're not really getting that aggressive kind of carbonation spice. It's more kind of the creamy bubbles, real smooth, kind of mellow. But yeah, that's basically a real cool thing about the 2 different beers is that this is a carbonation-based beer. But I'm kind of getting a little too far ahead of myself here. But the DBA, what makes this beer so unique and why it's been doing so well down here in San Diego particularly is we're actually the only brewery in the United States, only brewery in the whole states. There's only 2 breweries in the whole world that are doing this. But we're actually primary fermenting this beer inside oak barrels. So even as I'm first kind of coming in here, all your guys' oak barrel themes and stuff like that, this is just kind of a cool conversation piece. But basically, if you guys all want to kind of grab one of these cell sheets, here's a really cool picture of one of our lead brewers, Jim, who's actually racking the primary fermented wort, it's called, which is basically pre-beer. It's like the sugar water that comes from the malted barley, into these 60-gallon oak barrels. So again, only brewery in the States to do this. There was another brewery called Marston's that pioneered this in England, in a place called Burton-upon-Trent. It actually kind of reflects the water in the area there, but the biggest difference between the way that we ferment in oak barrels and the way that they ferment in oak barrels is they actually use oak barrels that are like the size of this room, and they don't spend them out. So they're getting that flavor from the fermentation happening in oak barrels rather than your big stainless steel conical vessel. However, they're not spending it out, so you're kind of getting just a real subtle oak flavor, whereas with our beers, it came from the roots from the Firestone Winery on the Central Coast, and Adam Firestone and David Walker, the owners of our company, the Firestone Walker Brewing Company, had their ties within the Firestone Winery. So they had all these old Chardonnay barrels laying around in Buellton, or the Solvang Valley, just north of Santa Barbara there, and they were home brewers, and they started home brewing inside these old Chardonnay barrels. They blew it for a good 6 to 8 months, recognizing, really appreciating professionalism, I think, a little bit more, but there was. Again, that was the traditional way that all the English brewers used to brew their beers, just in oak barrels before the advent of stainless steel. The reason why we call this beer double barrel ale, or DBA for short, is because 75% of it is fermented in your big stainless steel conical vats, which, I don't know, at least when before I started working for a brewery, I had one image in my head of the brewery as those big stainless steel conical vessels. So those are the fermenters. And the reason that, again, this is so unique is that in addition to 75% stainless steel fermentation with this beer, 25% is passed through oak barrels for primary fermentation. And again, the biggest difference between, you hear a lot of oak barrels in breweries now, but what they're doing dissimilarly is they're actually fermenting it in stainless steel and then putting it into oak barrels to sit there and age and pick up on the flavors. And more traditionally, they're using bourbon barrels or rye barrels or brandy barrels to age. Whereas we're using your standard kind of real light toasted American oak barrel for fermentation. So the difference between fermentation and aging is a world of a difference. And again, we're the only brewery in the States that do that, and every week we're actually spending out our eldest oak barrel and buying it a new one, because we're a brewery, we're not a winery. We can't make a varietal of double barrel ale. This has got to be the same beer every time. So recognizing that this beer pulls so much flavor as it's churning and as the yeast is consuming the sugar and making beer, we recognize that the oak barrels start to change color, or not colors, but flavors rather. So again, every week we're actually spending out our eldest and buying in a new one. So not a cost-efficient way to brew beer, but definitely we think there's no real other way that can be done. So a really unique process that, again, we're proud to say is our own. Brewery now is located in Paso Robles, which is in San Luis Obispo County. So just up the turn of the road there. It's usually where I extend the invitation. I mean, anybody ever go up to the Central Coast at all?
Yeah.
Seriously, I mean, take me up on it. I brought a bunch of business cards here. We do tours and a whole lot throughout the year and stuff, mostly weekends. But you guys being supporters of the brand, we would definitely be able to take care of you. So it's just right up the coast. Again, it's a family-owned microbrewery. Something that we're not shying away from telling people these days is there's a competition called the World Beer Cup. Happens every 2 years. Basically, this is kind of like the Olympics of beer. Every brewery wants to win a single award at this competition. And one of the most prestigious and most notable awards that they give away at this competition is the Champion Brewer. There's 3 different categories. There's the Small Brewery of the Year, the Mid-Sized Brewer of the Year, and the Champion Large-Sized Brewer of the Year. So, brewery that you guys are probably fairly familiar with, being that you have them on draft as well, Ballast Point Pale Ale. They won the Small Brewery of the Year, which is truly phenomenal feat for them. But that's from everything from 10 barrels, so your real nano brewery, to 15,000 barrels brewed, which is essentially 30,000 kegs. Every barrel is a couple kegs. So the second category is the mid-size, which goes from 15,000 barrels to 2 million barrels. So by far the most massive category there. That's the category that we fall into. We're doing right around 90,000 barrels right now, so definitely still on the low end of that category. But it's with the likes of Sam Adams, Sierra Nevada, New Belgium, Stone. Get this, no brewery's ever won Champion Mid-Sized Brewer 2 times. We just did it for the 3rd time, and unprecedented. No brewery's ever done it in 2010. So in 2004, in 2006, and in 2010, we've been named the Champion Mid-Sized Brewer in the world. And that's basically based on how many awards you win in how competitive the categories you are that you enter your styles. So I think one other thing that I really wanted to just kind of hit home with you guys is that we really focus on one styles with our beers. Obviously our seasonals and some of our barrel aging programs kind of, branch out of this category, but they'll write it on our shirts, they write it on our bottles. We have passion for making pale ales. So the English pale ales are a really great representation of a little bit more malty, kind of a caramel, vanilla kind of flavor. Definitely not hoppy. Now, I think a really common misconception with this beer particularly is we named it double barrel ale, again, based on fermenting in oak and fermenting in stainless steel. People, when they see double, they're thinking it's like an imperial or a big IPA or something like this, when in actuality, the styles between this English pale ale and an India pale ale or IPA couldn't be more dissimilar. So basically this is going to be your kind of transition beer. If anybody wants to kind of try a craft beer that's into Coors Light or Bud Light or some of these real lighter beers, this is a really good transitional beer. And the reason I say that is because it doesn't have that aggressive hop, spice, or bitterness.
Like Sierra Nevada.
Exactly, and I feel like a lot of your lighter domestic beer drinkers think that all craft beers are Stones are real aggressive and sometimes over the top and just miss the mark on the balance.
It's a light, mellow beer.
It basically, I think a perfect descriptor of this beer is a malty amber pale ale. And again, the malt is coming from the crushed malted barley. And that's where they're getting the sugars from when they crush up the malted barley and activate it with the hot water. It's a process called mashing. And basically, the couple keywords I think is going to be a vanilla, caramel, oaky flavors, definitely. And I've been in the restaurant business, pretty much all my life before getting into the brewing business here. And I just recognize that it's all about kind of creating that buzz about your tables, kind of a conversation starter of sorts. So you guys working at a place like this where there's oak barrels all over the place, I mean, what better kind of conversation starters? Now that you guys are a little bit more educated on how this beer is brewed, hey, check it out, I don't know, it's kind of a cool thing, but definitely mention, the unique process that is this oak fermentation is definitely something unique.
Stainless steel and then an oak barrel?
It's actually simultaneously, and then about 2 weeks later we blend them together.
75 and 25.
Yep, 75 stainless steel and 25 oak barrel fermentation.
I get it.
Correct.
Just mix it
And then we blend it together from there, and it's literally we have even the brewers from Stone, which we actually just did a collaboration with last year, and we brought 4 of our oak barrels down from our union and primary fermented with Stone for this big dark strong ale that we did. So even just goes to show another really great kind of conversation starter, and the way that we associate our brand with down here is this is a beer that Stone themselves, I know how popular Stone is, that they carry on draft there, and us doing a collaboration with them is just kind of a cool thing again to mention the quality that you should expect from this beer. So it's going to do really well as far as food pairings go because of this real caramel base malt, really well with caramelized types of foods. I haven't had a chance to kind of review your menu in too much of depth here, but anything caramelized, pizzas, pastas, onions, anything that can be caramelized on a saucepan, mushrooms, anything like that, really brings out the base malt. That is the really the unique characteristic, most particularly about the DBA. So, family owned and operated, and got a good thing going. So I was born and raised down here, and I really pride myself in why this brand's been really doing so well. Is that we really partner up with the operations more than just giving you a tap handle and saying good luck. So if there's any kind of feedback on our end that you can give me, whether doing some promotions or just kind of what you're hearing, if people have tried this before, where have they heard about it, just any of this kind of stuff, it's good for me as far as just being able to understand kind of what the market's about, and particularly with your guys' location here, how we can kind of help to increase that better customer experience. So, what'd you guys think? Pretty tasty, right?
It's really good.
Yeah, so just real mellow. Again, this is a really good transitional beer. So people that are interested in kind of getting into that craft beer revolution that is happening right now, this is a really good one to kind of push that way. So.
You had said something about it being really different from Indian Pale Ale.
Absolutely.
Did you mention that?
IPAs particularly, now, kind of a cool story with behind the IPA, I'll put it in a nutshell here, but basically in the late 1700s, as India was expanding their rule, or as Britain was expanding their rule into the India colonies, they basically, the British brewers would ship beer over to their soldiers in India around the tip of Africa, and by the time that the soldiers got them, it showed up flat. After that happened a number of times, the British brewers recognized that hops act as a natural preservative. Hops are also the spice and the bitterness component of the beer. So they'd overly hop their beer so by the time it got to the British soldiers in the India colonies, it'd still be preserved and fresh. The India Pale Ale, the IPA. So basically it's a much more hoppy, more aggressive beer. Traditionally it has a lot more malt, which again is what makes the beer ferment, so it has a higher alcohol as well. And this one, again, is it's a really good question actually, by the way, but it's very dissimilar in that this is a much more malty beer. The hops that we use are British hops as well. It's called a noble hop, but they're much more subtle, much more reserved than your American style, kind of IPA style of hops, more of like a West Coast style. So this is, exactly what you said. If someone's looking for an IPA, chances are this isn't going to be the style of beer that they would enjoy. And that's just what's so cool about the craft beer revolution is everyone's just kind of trying to figure out what they like. And me in particular, I really recognize now that I like more maltier beers. I like more balanced, more easily drinking beers. And we kind of coined this one a session beer. It's one of those ones where you can have 3, 4, or 5 of them. You're not going to fall out of your seat pissed drunk after, kind of thing. So it's just one of those ones where we really promote just doing pale ales, like we said. That we do real quintessential versions of them, and the pale ale always traditionally was one that was a traditional English session ale. So this is going to be the freshest version of, let's say, like a Bass style beer. So something you'd be a little bit more familiar with. A Bass is an English pale ale that was brewed in England as well, and this is basically the closest California version of it, being that it's traditionally brewed, that of in the oak barrels, and also the English malt that we use, and kind of everything that goes behind it. It should do pretty well for you guys.
How much alcohol?
This one's a 5% alcohol. Good question. The other kind of cool thing, if you get your beer geeks that run in here, there's a scale on which how bitter the beer is called the International Bitter Units, or IBUs. 1 real mellow, real reserved. 100's obviously like your big double IPAs. This one's just at a 31. So real on the low end of the IBU scale. So again, referencing that this is an easy drinking, more mellow kind of caramel vanilla style of beer here. So it's one we're really proud of. It's by far our best selling beer. Not quite down here, whereas again the hops and the aggressive and the spicier beers do a lot better. So we have I brought an American style pale and an IPA. Hopefully you guys can share those or take them home or whichever. But up in the Central Coast where the beers are brewed, we have more DBA tap handles from Oxnard up to Paso Robles than Budweiser.
Wow.
Should give you guys an impression as far as when people drink this beer, they like it, and that's just the thing. So I don't know if you guys are able to offer samples or anything if people are interested, but that's definitely a good way to, crack the shell and break the ice and just kind of create, like we said, that better experience for the customer. So appreciate you guys hearing it out. Hope you enjoy and hope it does well for you here.
Cool.
You guys have any other questions?
No, that was very informative.
Informative, right? I kind of rambled over myself once or twice.